In 1904, a man named Johann Hoch married a divorcee named Marie Walker in Chicago. They had met through a personal ad in a German-language newspaper and chatted for about half an hour before deciding to wed. 5 weeks after the wedding, Marie died of apparent kidney disease. While her corpse was lying on the bed, Hoch proposed to her sister, Emily. And Emily said yes. The day after they buried Marie, they tied the knot, then went to Emily's bank to take out her savings. The next day, Hoch disappeared with every cent. When the press got a hold of the story, tales of Hoch marrying and possibly murdering other women came in from all over. By the time they captured him in New York City, he had already proposed to what police believed might have been wife number 55. On the train back to Chicago, Hoch cracked so many jokes that he seemed like a German-language dialect comic, and his charm very nearly saved him from the gallows. That's how the story has been told at his trial and in various anthologies of tales of old-time serial killers ever since, but in digging through crumbling old affidavits, marriage records, divorce papers, microfilm newspapers, and trial transcripts, I found that it might not have happened exactly like that. So let's dig deep down, trace Hoch's whole career, and look at how some of these mysteries can still be solved today. This is Tomb Snoopers, with Adam Selzer and Patti Vasquez. Patti, how you doing?
I'm good. This is quite the story. I'm curious to find out what was the moment that 55 was. I mean, because he was playing it straight and getting away with it for so long.
More and more people all over the country are saying, I met this man through a matrimonial agency and he stole all my savings. And a lot of them, after they finally saw a picture of Hoch, said, oh, that's not the guy.
Is it because they didn't want to admit it?
Well, some of them, yeah. There were also stories that he was a hypnotist, which I think a lot of them found very comforting. It's like, oh, of course, he hypnotized me. Mm-hmm. It wasn't my fault. So that's a story that nobody was ever able to really separate fact from fiction on. The story has been retold in a lot of like murder encyclopedia books and anthologies, but they're still listing a lot of people as possible victims who definitely married somebody else, but that part of the story only made it to their local paper at the time. And nobody's ever been able to sort this stuff out. I certainly didn't get all of the story, but I was able to sort out a lot of fact from fiction and also find some elements that I can't believe didn't come up at the time. I don't know if anybody realized it. One of the bigger ones is when Hoch was put on trial in Chicago, he hired this completely hapless lawyer named Isidore Plotke. And nobody seems to have known at the time, because it definitely would have come up, that when Marie, the wife that he killed, had been divorced, Isidore Plotke had been her divorce lawyer.
Oh my God.
This definitely should have come up at the time. He was big. Yeah, the next lawyer that he hired when he was working on appeals was the boyfriend of a reporter who was working to get him freed. And apparently nobody really mentioned that at the time. There was also plenty of suggestions that the sister that he married might have been in on her sister's murder. And also some suggestions that she might have had some particular grudge against her sister. A lot of this stuff just kind of came and went from the story.
Wow. Well, it would almost, the fact that she said yes so quickly, got married so quickly, it would lend itself to...
Yeah, and also the fact that Hoch knew it was worth killing Marie to marry her, too, is he didn't have that great of a success rate. He proposed to a lot more women than actually said yes. So killing Marie to get to her sister, who had a little more money, not a ton of money, was a really big risk on his part, unless he already knew that she was going to say yes.
Right.
So there's a lot of stuff here. This has been a really interesting case because, Hoch was such a goofball when they caught him. They had him on a train back to Chicago and said, all right, Hoch, how come you married so many women? He would say things like, oh, other women for Johann go crazy, yeah. And this was not a very attractive guy,
I was
going to
say, unless the standards were different.
Well, yeah, there were people who described him as handsome, or at least, enough. He looked like the guy in the Pringles can. And
exactly.
Talked like a German character on The Simpsons. But most of his people that he targeted were were divorcees or widows who were approximately middle-aged or so. A lot of them were women who had just had their husband die who was decades older than they were. Now here comes this guy their own age who says that he's got all kinds of money and we can go on a trip back to Germany. And it was really just a business deal to get married to this guy. At the time we had dozens of matrimonial agencies around Chicago, matchmakers. People would place ads in the newspaper just saying, looking for a husband. That's all how he met a lot of his people. The thing is, even the most reputable of these matrimonial agencies must have been really easy prey for swindlers.
I would imagine, yeah.
So, and I think there's even one case where the woman he married was trying to swindle him. At least once. I can't believe it didn't happen more often than that. But this is what I've been able to find. I was able to verify about 20 marriages. He's got some tells in the paperwork. So a couple of these never even got mentioned at the time. But nowadays, it's much easier to find marriage records in other states. More and more things have been digitized. I've been able to get newspapers from all over the country. I still had to do a lot of digging beyond the internet. And that's really the theme of this show. This is Tomb Snoopers, everybody. We are going to dig deep into these stories. I'm Adam Selzer. I've been a tour guide and historian in Chicago and New York for over 20 years now. I've got about 25 books out, ranging. I started out writing young adult novels for a living. Then I veered into Chicago history stuff. Most notably, I did a book about Graceland Cemetery here in Chicago and a book called H.H. Holmes, The True History of the White City Devil. And that was a case, H.H. Holmes, the Devil in the White City guy, we'll probably have to do a season on him eventually.
No kidding.
The story is that he had this hotel during the World's Fair of 1893 that was rigged up with trapdoors and hidden chambers. We call it the Murder Castle now, and was preying on women who came to the fair. And when I started digging into the primary sources, the earliest sources, it turned out to be way off. That building was never a hotel. He said he was going to turn it into a hotel, but it was all just a big swindling operation. He did kill 9 or 10 people. It wasn't any 200. But sorting out fact from fiction in that and figuring out how the story grew and evolved into what it is now was really fascinating. I spent a lot of time in the legal archives getting all the paperwork from the times that he got sued. He got sued constantly. And digging up the original versions of articles, tracing them back to the earliest sources. And you find you can build these stories better now than they probably could then. And it was just a fascinating thing. I really wanted to do it with Johann Hoch as well, who was rumored for a while to have been the janitor at the Murder Castle building.
Oh my God! Of course, there had to be some link.
Yeah, they've always got to. Well, he did
together.
Yeah, the house where Marie died you could stand on the porch and see the Murder Castle building. It was that close.
Oh, sure.
And at one point, Hoch even told one of his wives that he owned that building without going into what it was. So it's kind of his own damn fault if people thought he was connected. And we'll have to get into that. It was a major part of the story at the time for a minute there. But he was just such a goofball to research. This joker. We want to know all the names of your previous wife. The last was Mrs. Johann Hoch. Before that was Mrs. Johann Hoch. And this is what I came to find out in research of this is a persona he created for himself the night he was captured in jail. They never talked about him being a goofball, but they had him in jail right by the Puck building in New York, where Puck magazine was published. I don't know if there's really a connection there. There's lots of these little connections that probably mean nothing, but poetically they work. And he just created this persona for himself, and that's what he'd been doing for years. He'd, to paraphrase Taylor Swift, he'd find out what they want and be that guy for a month.
And how much of it was the journalists or the writers at the time, flowering these things up, wanting to lean into the scandal?
Oh, sure, they had a lot of fun with that, and they're also as good a source of information as anything else. The police were spreading the wilder rumors in the newspapers were.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, Inspector Shippey would dream up any number of things in those days. There's this whole cast of characters that converged around this scene. You've got Hoch himself. Some of the women that he had married and deserted were real characters in and of themselves. Emily Fisher, his last wife, the sister that he just deserted instead of killing, was an absolute character and just really a fascinating person to be researching, and I can come to no real conclusions about her. But we've got Chief O'Neill, who is better remembered for his efforts to preserve Irish folk music than he was for his police work. We've got Inspector Shippey, who's the kind of guy who would prop up a corpse in a mausoleum and lead the suspects of his murder in to have them look at the corpse and see if they might confess. In the same case, he rented a horse that he thought might magically lead them to the killers. He was a few years later, he would assassinate a guy who had come to his house mainly just because he thought he looked Jewish and must be an anarchist. Oh. And never spent... He was they decided that it was self-defense, but he never spent another day in uniform, and pretty soon he was actually in asylums. His brain was starting to fall apart, I think, by the time of the Hoch case, possibly due to syphilis.
Oh my God! Do we know which asylum, by the way? Because I know like the one out isn't there one out by the northwest side of Chicago?
Oh, there's quite a few.
They dug up like a bunch of.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, they dug up a bunch of like bones.
Oh yeah, out by Dunning.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Dunning.
yeah. Hoch himself was briefly buried at Dunning.
Really?
Just briefly.
Who knew?
But they couldn't find anywhere else to bury him at first, so they buried him in like a grave at Dunning that I thought he was in forever. But there's like a small item he'd been moved to Elmwood Cemetery.
Okay.
And so it's an unmarked grave there. I know approximately where it is.
That's the hardest find a grave ever.
That one's really hard because he was buried in a term grave that was only supposed to be good for 30 years, and after 30 years, nobody paid to have him moved, so they redeveloped the land.
Oh golly!
And so the exact space you can't find anymore.
So is it possible something's built over him?
Probably, yeah.
Oh,
it's elsewhere in the cemetery. I can trace about the space.
Sure.
And it was very interesting because it was right near a grave that said Schmidt, which was his real last name. And right near that was a grave for Elizabeth Weber, which is his mother's real maiden name. And what does this mean? Elizabeth Weber is also the name of Billy Joel's first wife. But this doesn't mean anything.
So many dots. I don't know
this doesn't necessarily mean anything, but some of these things, they start to feel like they do when you dig this far into the story. So this is Tomb Snoopers, everybody. We are going to spend at least 10 episodes, I'd say, just digging way into the story of Johann Hoch and all of the people that he married, all of his crimes, all of the efforts to get him off of the hook, all of the things that people mysteriously missed at the time, or that just got covered up. There are certain things that the newspapers didn't want to publish, I think, because they were just too squeamish. There were certain indications that the cops had probably planted some arsenic in the dead body just to make sure they got that conviction. And arsenic poisoning had generally been a perfect crime in those days, because there was arsenic in embalming fluid. So as soon as the undertaker stepped into a room, nobody was getting convicted.
Oh
but Hoch had not been following the advances in the embalming arts and sciences, I guess. They had started switching to fluids that didn't contain arsenic now.
See, I always, as a kid, I didn't understand why arsenic and old lace. I mean, because I love the movie.
Oh, it's one of my favorites.
But obviously, from the experience, I mean, it had been written, what, in the 1930s? 30s or so? Because, that's around when the movie was done. But it had to be a stage play first.
Yeah.
So it's all this lore of, being able to, these two old, if you haven't seen it, folks, it's two little old biddies and Cary Grant.
Yeah.
They're
two old ladies who poison men who come into their boarding house.
Was it mostly women that were using arsenic, or it was kind of a...
Definitely it was popular among women.
Okay.
It was a popular way to get rid of an unwanted husband. But Hoch was using it as well. It was anybody who wanted to kill somebody. That was a very safe way at the time. A couple of the people involved in the case later said that probably for every poisoning we detect in Chicago, probably 20 of them, people get away with it.
Whoa. Okay.
No. Arsenic was one of the number ones. There were ways to do it faster.
And what was, this is just something that was available? It was something
you could buy it for rat poison. There was
right.
Tilly Klimek, another Chicago killer, her favorite brand was Rough on Rats.
Okay.
So Hoch is now buried out there in an unmarked grave, and probably with any other... there's a lot of secrets that I'm sure were just buried with him. There are a lot of things that I could never resolve in this case. There are some people I could never find what happened to them. And one of the reasons it was so hard for reporters in the state to put together the story back then is the names are so complicated. So in Germany in those days, pretty much every boy was named Johann. And then you had another name, like a roof name, they called it. Like, Johann Sebastian Bach probably went by Sebastian because all those brothers were also Johann. The girls, it was usually Mary or Anna. Okay. And once these people got to the States, they would often switch back and forth between those two names interchangeably, but also not just the German version, but also the anglicized version. And then when women got married, they used their married names. So people don't always know in the press that, like, Catherine Muller, Carolina Hoch, and Carolyn Huff were all the same person. Or Julia Steinbrecher and Maria Hoch were the same person. There were multiple Mary Hochs. Almost every woman in this story went by Mary at least half the time.
When did we stop going by switching names?
I'm not sure when that fell out of favor in Germany. I'm not really sure, but they used the name so many times, and there was the one woman in the case, Mary Warnicki, who usually was called Mary Rankin in the press. It's amazing how many ways they found to spell Rankin in the press.
Which makes your job even harder.
Yeah, which makes it even harder, and that was only one of several names that she herself used. I can't wait to talk more about her. She was an absolute character who had a whole huge backstory of her own, and it's wild and crazy. So Hoch was born under the name Johann Jacob Schmidt. And often when he got to the States, he anglicized that to John Jacob Schmidt.
Oh, my God.
He's only lacking the Jingleheimer.
Yeah.
And I love that because a few years back, I posted on the old Twitter that today I'm researching the legend of John Jacob Jingleheimer Schmidt, who murdered several people and ate their bones, but most of the versions of the song leave that part out now. And I thought it was just an obvious joke, but I've learned in this field the things that I think are obvious jokes can sound true. And all the responses were like, oh, wow, I never knew that.
Right. Well, especially coming from you.
Yeah, I can see how they would make that mistake. There's no Jingleheimer. The first time I saw him sign his name as John Jacob Schmidt, I cracked up. Whenever he went out, the people would, in fact, shout. So this is what we're going to be doing here on Tomb Snoopers. To build it up, there's going to be a new Patreon you can check out, patreon.com/tombsnoopers. And over there, you'll be able to access all of these pictures I'm talking about, the newspaper articles I'm talking about, the legal documents that I'm talking about, all the stuff that I've researched on this. As this was a case where there's a lot of stuff that was on the internet, a lot of newspaper articles, a lot of genealogical type data, but not enough. There were still a lot of things where I had to go into the microfilm reels to get articles that have never been digitized. There were things I had to go to get court records from Springfield. Like they found me his executive clemency file. This is the file of all the stuff when they were trying to build up a pardon for it. That's got like affidavits from his last wife that if she is telling the truth in these affidavits, which is far from certain, but if she's telling the truth, it turns the whole case upside down.
How are these records stored? I mean, because it seems almost incomprehensible that we have so much available.
Yeah, and these ones, it's all still in paper,
right.
And you can go down to Springfield and request it if they can find it. In the case of Hoch, I asked them several times to find the Hoch clemency files. There was a huge effort to get him a pardon or a new trial, so there had to be the paperwork, and they kept telling me, no, we can't find it. And sometimes it gets folded into another case eventually, or it just gets lost over the years. I don't know what the filing system back there is like. When I've been down there in person, they will just, I asked for the file of Sam Cardinella. They brought out this huge box of hundreds of pages of a petition to get the guy released, and all of the affidavits and paperwork and whole pages of stuff in shorthand that I never got transcribed, and lots of interesting stuff, and it's just kind of, I guess, sitting in boxes down there. In the case of the Hoch clemency file, they kept telling me they couldn't find it. Then one day I asked, please, can you check again? And they found it.
Oh my. I wish I knew what that process was like.
I wish I knew. It just filed out of order or something. Mm-hmm. And
well, you never know if you set something in motion when you ask something,
right.
And then somebody goes back and they can't, but then it's on their mind.
Right,
knows,
and they might stumble across it at some point.
Yeah, you kind of flagged it for them.
Yeah, and there's some really interesting stuff in the clemency files down there, and they're kind of a pain to get. One of them I just requested they found, but I'm going to have to go down there to see it, because having them copy it, it's so many pages, it would cost me hundreds of dollars.
Oh my God.
And with Hoch, I also was able to find the trial transcripts. I was able to find divorce records of a couple of his previous wives, which tend to be wild and crazy stories. And that's also where I found out that his lawyer was his victim's divorce lawyer.
Okay.
Which really, I think if his next lawyer had known that, he would have brought it up as a conflict of interest. He was trying to find every legal point he could to get Hoch a new trial. And had he known that, it definitely would have come up. And there were people who said that Hoch should get a new trial just because that lawyer was so bad. At one point, it came up. They had a medical expert testifying. He said the amount of arsenic that was found in the stomach should have been in much worse shape than it actually was. There's no way that arsenic was placed there while she was still alive. It must have come in after death. And the most obvious thing here is the police must have done it. Mm-hmm. The police had announced that he was guilty right from the start. They had announced as soon as the story broke they were going to hang this guy. Had they dug up that body and not found arsenic right away, they would not have been above planting it. I mean, we're talking about Inspector Shippey and Coroner Hoffman here. These were two phenomenally corrupt individuals. In Shippey's case, it wasn't It is almost more incompetence than corruption, but Hoffman is coroner, like a guy who got molten metal poured on him at the factory and died. He ruled that it was tuberculosis that killed him. Okay. Probably got the factory and the insurance companies off of the hook.
And in this instance, though, with our case, was it for the headlines that they wanted to make sure they got him hung?
Possibly, yeah. They like talking to the press. Okay. And Hoffman was building up his career. He would eventually be sheriff himself. And there's a character in Ben Heck's The Front Page. The sheriff character is clearly based on Hoffman, who is making sure a guy gets hanged just because there's an election coming up, and he wants to look tough.
There you go.
So I've introduced myself. I'm a tour guide and historian here in Chicago. Patti, what about...
So much pressure. Hi, I'm Patti Vasquez. I started out in my career as a stand-up comedian because I dropped out of grad school where I was pursuing a PhD in history. So it kind of lends itself to our conversation. Yeah. And I also have traveled for over 30 years performing around the world. And at one point became a radio host at WGN. And one night my producer said, hey, I've got this guy who does cemetery tours and ghost stories. Would you like to meet Adam Selzer? And that's how we started having these conversations. And Adam became a regular guest on my show, willing to come down and do my show from 11 in the evening till 2 in the morning.
Yeah, and I'm a morning person too, not a night person.
And climbing stairwells in the Tribune Tower.
Yeah, we did some of that. And but we always had a good time. Yeah. It was always fun. I'd meet lots of interesting people at your place, and we've gone on to do live streams together. We go door knocking in Wisconsin during election season, and then pig out at Brat Stop. So
we still have to go back and see Katie. By the way, she was not there last time.
We do. Our favorite server at the Brat Stop.
Yeah. So thank you for having me along for this ride.
Yeah, thanks. When I wanted to do this podcast where we dig deeper into these stories than I really have room for, the publishers can give you a pretty strict word count limit on these things, and I almost feel like a tease in the book we're talking about. There's one of the reporters for the Chicago American, Evelyn Campbell, is a really interesting person herself. She was a great reporter, not as great a detective as she could have been, but she can hardly be blamed for that. She had as good as the police were anyway. And some of her articles are just fascinating, but I can only excerpt a little bit of them. I almost feel like I'm teasing people. And same thing with Jean Cowgill, another reporter who covered the Pitt case, and her boyfriend ended up being his lawyer. She wrote all kinds of interesting articles. She was writing this series called The Perils of a Big City about how the perils of ice cream parlors and chop suey restaurants, it's not as bad as it sounds. That one, when I found that article, but no, it was mostly women go there unaccompanied, without chaperones.
Shocker.
She herself had gotten married as a teenager to an actor and performed on stage with her husband in a play called Is Marriage a Failure? And then got divorced, and written into a lot of her articles are like regrets for the wild life that she had lived.
Oh, and my Lord.
She wrote some very interesting things. One time in 1901, she was interviewing Thomas Edison. She was interviewing Mr. Marconi, who told her that one day we would have pocket editions of telephones that could call anybody without using wires. And very interesting stuff. I've got a lot of her articles. She interviewed Hawk in his cell. It's only like an excerpted, shorter version is available in any of the newspaper archives online so far. And that's part of what it is. It was like a serialized in a paper that you could find online. I'm like, all right, I got her interview. But then I went and got the original from the paper she was actually writing for in the microfilm room, and it was much, much longer. The serialized version had cut out a lot. I find that a lot. You've got to get... there's a lot of people who really rip on using newspapers as sources. We've all heard about like yellow journalism, and Evelyn Campbell wrote for the Hearst papers in Chicago, which we just associate with exaggerated stories. But I really find the Hearst papers are better than people give him credit for. A lot of what we think about Hearst comes mainly from all the things his rivals said about him, first and foremost. And also in the 1950s, reporters were writing memoirs in which they claimed to have invented pretty much everything that ever happened.
Yeah, that's not going to be helpful.
If they had said, Calvin Coolidge, that guy wasn't even real. We just made him up. And it would not have been out of character for those reporter memoirs. That was what people wanted to hear, that all the news had always been fake. And to the extent that you can line these things up with things like legal records and stuff, you find that they did a pretty good job. The difference in Hearst papers is more in what stories they focus on than anything else. I mean, the Chicago Daily Inter-Ocean might talk about how society has become so degraded and impure, the American would pick specific cases to highlight about that. They wouldn't just talk about there's this neighborhood called the Black Hole full of brothels. They'd write all the specific details about one of those brothels. And it's a paper that has not yet been digitized. You still have to go get it out of the microfilm room. But it's also what you're watching here is kind of the beginning of the 24-hour news cycle. The American was an evening paper. Their first edition would come out at noon. Then if there was a lot of breaking news, they'd have extra editions. They'd have the afternoon edition, the sporting editions that had all the baseball scores. They'd have the country and home edition. Sometimes every 45 minutes or so, there'd be a new edition on the street.
The original social media.
Yeah, it's very, very, very similar to that. And what's interesting is not all of these are really preserved, but a lot of times the microfilm reels that they have will have at least the first page of every edition.
Okay.
So like for one day you can see 12 different front pages, and most of the inside isn't going to be that different from edition to edition, just like whatever new information gets written in. And newspapers kind of get bashed as a source, but oftentimes the trick is you have to know which papers to look at. For a story like this, you want papers with a reporter on the ground. If they're talking about his wives in St. Louis, you want to get the St. Louis papers that are actually interviewing people who knew him. Like for instance, the Johann Hoch, the H.H. Holmes case, I find people citing articles about the murder castle from the Cincinnati Enquirer. The Cincinnati Enquirer was not sending a reporter to Chicago for this case. They were just piecing together stuff from other articles. For stuff about the murder castle, you want to get stuff from the Chicago papers. And he was on trial in Philadelphia. The Chicago papers covered the trial, but you'll get much better stuff from the Philadelphia papers, who are also like breaking into his jail cell and publishing letters from his ex-wife.
No.
Yeah.
Wow, those are great lengths.
Yeah,
to get a story.
Yeah, well, there was a case a couple of years before Hoch, Adolf Lutgert, the sausage murderer, whose wife was not made into sausage.
I was gonna say,
and yeah, it's a very difficult story to tell, the Lutgert story, because if you mention sausage factory and murder, people expect that somebody's going to get eaten.
I mean,
and Louisa Lutgert was never made into sausage. Her body was boiled down in a curing vat. And one of the Chicago papers was able to publish all of the jury deliberations.
Really?
Which, yeah, they were like line by line. The jurors were just shocked. And then like a week later, they admitted what they had done is they had a guy lowered down the air shaft. And they even published a diagram of this in the paper like a week later. They were just very open about it. And he's
sitting there with a pencil and paper and just
sat there and transcribed all of the jury deliberations.
Whoa.
And accurately too.
How has that never been in a movie?
I have no idea. There's a lot of stuff here that I have no idea how it's never been in a movie.
Yeah.
So that is the story. Johann Hoch. I have a book about him out in September called Chicago's Serial Husband through Arcadia Press, but it's a very tight word count. So through the Patreon and possibly through like a supplement book that I could just toss up on Amazon or something, or one of those indie sites, you can find a lot more of this material. You can follow along with Patti and myself, and I will tell the whole story. We'll dig into how we find this stuff. And so this is season 1. I've also got, there's other projects that I've done like this. I had a book out earlier this year called Graveyards of Trinity Church in St. Paul's in New York, New York City graveyards. There's so many interesting things that I didn't have room for in the book. There's one guy at St. Paul's who was challenged to a duel via a book-length poem. Luckily, one copy of that book-length poem, it was actually published by one of his rivals. It's like, the guy rhymes Jersey with dare say at one point. And there's a book that he called the Plagioscariliad. There's a copy extant in Chicago at the Newberry Research Library. I couldn't find it digitized anywhere. I would have reprinted the entire damn poem in the book if there was word count limit. It was a riot. There's just so much of this stuff that we don't really have room for. So thank you for joining us. We'll be posting, I think, every week as we get through this story, and then there's plenty of other things we can talk about, these fascinating stories that have just slipped through the cracks over the years. So this is us, Tomb Snoopers. I'm Adam Selzer.
I'm Patti Vasquez.
And we'll see you next time here to start the story of Johann Hoch.
I'm excited to be along for the ride.
Tomb Snoopers is brought to you by patreon.com/tombsnoopers. Get early access to episodes, bonus content, and lots of the documents, data, articles, and photos that we refer to on each episode. Patreon.com/tombsnoopers. Also find us on Facebook and Instagram.